What is up? Today I've got something special for you. I am going to tell you how to make my version of the Fast Gunner Predator build. That even in this state that I have it, which is far from its potential, is out DPSing or out damaging the majority of builds. Here's a look at my stat page. I have 31% crit rate, which is the minimum I would say you want to have in a build. Nice amount of crit damage, a decent amount of weak spot damage, a pretty good chunk of weapon damage, and the rest doesn't really matter. This kinda does, and this kinda does. This is the star of the show, the MG4 Predator, which will set you back 8k star crom, as there's no option but to buy it outright, as of right now anyway. If it does come up in a bundle on the Gamba machine, I advise you go for that, as you might save some star crom. And what does it do? Each hit has a 40% chance to trigger Fast Gunner, which gives you 1% weapon damage and rate of fire per stack. The default stack amount is 5, but you can increase this with armor pieces and a mod that I will go over later on. Whenever your Fast Gunner reaches a stack of 5, 10, 15, etc., you gain infinite ammo for 0.5 seconds, which does not sound like long, but trust me, this benefits your damage output hugely. And when it says infinite ammo, it means infinite ammo, meaning you ain't consuming your ammo. So you have that as well. Each hit on the same target consecutively gives you 2% weapon damage, up to 40%. As long as you do not switch targets from the boss you are DPSing, you will more than likely be at max stacks of this all the time. And lastly, whenever the remaining bullets is more than 50% of your magazine capacity, you get an extra 40% attack, which is good. I have also recalibrated this with a purple variant, because I don't have the gold variant yet of the rapid shot style, which gives you a plus 7.5 fire rate, negative 50 accuracy, which can be offset by attachments, and I advise you do. Accuracy and stability help out a lot with this build, and you get an extra 7.5% fire rate after continuous fire for 2 seconds, which you will be doing a lot. The gold variant bumps these 7.5s up to 10, which gives you a total potential of 20% fire rate, which is why LMGs are very good for burst DPS and continuous DPS, as more bullets equals more damage. The attributes you want on your calibration are of course crit rate. The higher crit rate, the better. I do not see any other attribute benefiting any build really more than crit rate. For my second weapon, which I use for ad clear, I have this R500 Memento. I wasted 8,000 star crom on this. I don't advise you do that. Just use the crossbow switch off that most people do. I personally don't like the crossbow switch off. It feels too clunky for me, but if you're used to doing it, why not keep doing it? It is kinda satisfying that this weapon can hit 33,000 on a crit headshot though. It feels kinda nice. And for my melee weapon, I use the long axe or Fortress Warfare. That will also give me plus 10% weapon damage and movement speed for 10 seconds after it ends, thanks to this mod, which if you are using Fortress Warfare, you should use this mod, because Fortress Warfare does not last long at all. I almost forgot to go over the mod I'm using on my primary, which is Shootout Fast Gunner. I got this from a Prime War, which means that I get attributes that benefit Fast Gunner. This mod is the flat out best Fast Gunner mod out there when it comes to raw damage, because each time you trigger Fast Gunner by just hitting an enemy, you get 1.5% weapon damage, up to 20 stacks, so that's 25% weapon damage, and this will be up 100% of the time near enough when fighting bosses, so don't worry about it only lasting 10 seconds. I also get an extra 6.4% weapon damage when I'm in Fast Gunner state, and an extra 12% crit, which could be better, but I need to grind, but that's the real grind. If you're opting to use the recurve crossbow, which I advise as your secondary, you should be using vulnerability amplifier, as this gives you an extra plus 8% vulnerability, which doubles the amount of vulnerability you add to bosses, giving you a total of 16% vulnerability, meaning wherever you have applied vulnerability to will take 16% extra damage. As for the attributes of this mod, don't worry about them, they do not come into play. For my armor pieces, I am using 2 pieces of Scout to give me 10% max HP and 8% weapon damage. This is a great option for anybody like me that hasn't yet invested into a better gear set. For my mask, I am using the Precise Shot mask, which gives me extra reload up to 250%, which helps a lot in boss fights, as the reload on LMGs is quite big. I do plan on switching this out for an upgrade path that I will go over later in the video. The other gear set I am benefiting in this build is Renegade. I believe I got this when trying to roll for the last Valor, so if you have it already, then you might as well use it. Since I am using 3 pieces, it gives me plus 15% reload speed, another 10% weak spot damage, and each time you hit the same target, you get 1 stack of Archer's Focus, which gives you 4% weak spot damage per stack, up to 10 stacks, so 40% extra weak spot damage. It's pretty good, but I do plan on switching this out later down the road. Now for the juiciness, the mods. Every single mod you want should be violent, because violent gives you up to 15% crit damage. I have 3 purple rolls, which give me plus 12, and 3 blue rolls, which give me plus 9. Actually, I think I only have 2 blue rolls. But anyway, the attributes you see on this mod right here are the attributes you want to go for. You can also go for magazine size, as that benefits your total damage output way more than you would think. However, crit damage is just good. Weapon damage is just good. Damage to elite enemies, so the bosses in silos and all that, is good. And damage to great ones, which are monolith bosses, is of course good if you're playing that content. With the attributes out the way, let's just go over what mods I'm using. But quickly before that, of course you want to enhance your mods. This will cost a lot, and you will need to grind your bloody head off to get every mod you have to 5 out of 5. And there's a chance you don't even get max crit damage, as you will see with my mods. So be prepared if you want to full on min-max this build to grind your fucking head off. But aside from that, the mod I'm using for my hood is Momentum Up, which gives me another plus 10% fire rate for the first 50% of the magazine, and plus 30% weapon damage for the next 50% of the magazine. This is the mod you want to go for on your head. You may be tempted to go for Fateful Strike, however, this is a trap. The extra 30% crit damage and 10% crit rate, that is great, especially on top of the attributes. However, taking away the ability to deal weak spot damage really hurts fast gunner builds. So I do not advise going that route. Moving on to the mask, I'm using Blitzkrieg Violent. This gives you an extra plus 5 fast gunner stacks, bringing it up to 10 total stacks, and an additional plus 1% fire rate for each stack, bringing our potential fire rate increase to 20%, which is great. You should definitely run Blitzkrieg on your mask. The other fast gunner mods are just not as good. For my chest, it may surprise you or not if you are experienced with this game, but I'm running a blue mod. Why am I running a blue, you ask? Well, if you look at all the gold ones, they are all defensive. And I don't care about dying. I care about showing off my big PP size and getting big damage. So I run crit damage enhancement. which I think is the best outright blue mod to run. And the attributes I have is an extra 6% crit damage on top of the 12, and some damage to great ones, which is okay. Could be better though. For our pantaloons, we are running Deadshot Violent. This is the outright best mod for every single build, and it gives you plus 5% crit damage up to 45% whenever you hit a crit. It does get reset on reload, but believe me, your damage output will be better than any other alternative when using this mod. For our gloves, I like to run Crit Amplifier, Violent again, which gives us plus 10% crit rate and plus 15% crit damage. An alternative that is also pretty good is Munitions Amplifier, which will give you 15% flat out weapon damage. So if you want to go that route, then feel free. It will bring your crit rate down a little bit too much for my liking though. And if you want your crit rate to be just super high, then you have Crit Boost Violent. But it only gives you an extra 5% crit rate, and you lose that 15% crit damage, which is not worth it in my opinion. And last but not least, we have our boots. I am running Secluded Strike, which means that having no enemies within 7 meters around me gives me plus 15% weapon damage and status damage, but that doesn't come into play with this build, which is a pretty good chunk. There is, however, a few alternatives for your shoes. If you have a good rolled slow and steady, you can run that. It does give you a extra 5% weapon damage in total. However, you are required to be above 90% health, which, let's be honest, if you're in a boss fight, most of the time you are not above 90%, especially when sanity comes into play. If you have a good rolled covered advance, which I believe the gold version does give you 20%, then that is a good option, and something that I may switch to once I eventually grind out that roll. So feel free to use that in place. Ferocious Charge is also a good alternative. However, you have to be very aggressive when using this build, and if there's no ads, you're kinda fucked. That's it for the gear you want. There is a few things in the Cradle you also want to run. First off, you want to run Automatic Weapon Enhancement because it makes your LMGs do 20% more damage, as well as reload 10% of your magazine whenever you defeat an enemy. You of course want to run Deviation Master, which gives you plus 50% damage against deviants as long as you have your deviation out. Master Tactician will also give you an extra 25% damage for 15 seconds against Great Ones, meaning monolith bosses. So this is a really good thing to run in your Cradle. Just make sure you have quick use tactical items turned on in your settings, as it will help a lot when trying to activate this perk. Tactical Combo is a given, plus 25% weapon damage for 4 seconds when you switch weapons or reload. Also, as a side note, don't worry about any perks that I'm running that I skip over, they're just not integral to the build. Next up, we have our only option that will buff Fast Gunner. Unfortunately, this season, I'm not too sure if this changes each season, but we do not have much things that benefit Fast Gunner. This will give us plus 40% weak spot damage when in Fast Gunner, which is why I urge people not to use the mod on your helmet that disables weak spot damage. This is a huge damage buff. And last, we have Bounty Hunter. After you defeat a unit you have marked, which keep in mind it has to be you that does the marking, you get 25% weapon damage and 35% weak spot damage. Another reason not to run that hell mod. This lasts 15 seconds. You'll be able to proc this by using the crossbow switch off, or my personal favourite, the Butterfly Deviant also marks enemies. Which brings us on to the last important parts of the build. What deviants do you want to run? I advise trying out the butterfly first. I don't have the best butterfly, but it gives me an extra 25% weak spot damage for 5 seconds whenever I hit an area marked by the butterfly. The butterfly itself also does decent damage, and of course you will be able to benefit from Bounty Hunter when running this guy. Alternatives are the wolf, which gives me an extra 32.4 bunch of zeros 6% damage because I have a somewhat decent rolled one. Or our boy the mini feaster is also a pretty good option. However, he is very bounce orientated. You will very rarely get the max bonus of weapon damage of 84% and will most likely be sitting down at the 21%. However, 21% is nothing to shake your fist at. So if you like this guy, then feel free to run him. Now to end off the video, I want to go over some upgrade paths that I want to take. The first thing that I am going to buy whenever I get the Star Crom is the Oasis Mask Frag, which will give me an extra 10 Fast Gunner stacks and double my damage bonus per stack, meaning we would have a potential 60% weapon damage bonus and rate of fire bonus, which is insane. Keep in mind that once I start running this, reloading will be a bit more painful. However, I think it's worth it. For my armor sets, I am going to be boring and run the typical one piece of Bastille for the 10% weapon damage when above 70%, and 4 pieces of Lone Wolf for the magazine capacity, crit rate, and crit damage per stack. It's just too good not to run. So if you have any of that pieces, then run that in place of what I have equipped and you will be juiced as fuck and big dick your way everywhere. So anyway, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Drop any tips to improve my build or upgrade path down in the comments, and maybe even show off what build you're running and all that down in the comments. Why not? And whilst you're down there, give me a like. It helps a lot. And why not subscribe? And with that said, that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.